Everything you fought for in Elden Ring was built on a lie. Not a small lie, not a political deception or a hidden agenda. I'm talking about a lie so fundamental, so all-encompassing, that it invalidates the entire cosmic order you spent hundreds of hours navigating. The gods you served? Improvising. The prophecies guiding you? Outdated instructions from a communication system that broke down before recorded history. The kindest, most benevolent figure in the entire game, violating minds and stealing free will to build his gentle paradise. But let's start with the biggest revelation, the one that recontextualizes everything. Queen Marika, the eternal goddess who shaped the Golden Order, was a victim of genocide before she ascended to divinity. Let that land. The radiant queen who ruled the lands between with divine authority for ages untold, who shattered the very Elden Ring itself in an act that broke the world. She came from a village so small it barely appears on any map. Her people, the Shamans, were systematically hunted, tortured, and stuffed into jars as part of sacred rituals performed by the Horn-sent civilization. Every single person she ever knew was murdered and transformed into those friendly jar warriors you met in the base game. When Marika gained the power of Godhood, she did exactly what you'd expect someone with that kind of trauma to do. She burned her tormentor's civilization to ash, erased it from history, and built the Golden Order on top of the mass grave. Welcome to Shadow of the Erdtree, where From Software finally reveals the darkest foundation in their entire catalog. This isn't just an expansion adding new areas and bosses. This is the story that makes you realize you never understood Elden Ring at all. This is where you discover that Miquella the Kind, beloved by all, was using supernatural charm to dominate minds and force devotion. The battle between Malenia and Radahn was an assassination disguised as an honorable duel. Morg, Lord of Blood, was a puppet manipulated into performing rituals for someone else's plan. The Two Fingers spent centuries improvising divine guidance after losing contact with the greater will. The entire cosmic hierarchy you thought governed reality is actually a broken telephone game played by abandoned entities who can't admit they don't have answers anymore. Everything was a lie. The grace that guided you, the prophecies that set your path, the cosmic order that seemed so absolute, all of it built on foundations of revenge, manipulation, and desperate improvisations by entities who lost contact with their purpose generations ago. And here's the revelation that will haunt you. Miquella, in trying to fix his mother's mistakes, was becoming exactly like her. Step by step, sacrifice by sacrifice, he was walking the same path to the same prison, unable to see that his solution was just another version of the problem. So settle in. We're about to descend beneath the veil Marika, erected to hide her greatest shame and her darkest triumph. We're going to walk through the land of shadow, following the trail of a demigod who discarded pieces of himself like breadcrumbs leading to his own annihilation. We're going to meet a forgotten son who carried out a crusade history will never sing about. And we're going to watch as the kindest soul in the lands between transforms into something that makes you question whether compassion enforced through mind control is really compassion at all. The journey ahead will change everything you thought you knew. Let's begin. Part 1. The Veil Lifted. Entering the Land of Shadow. The journey to Shadow of the Erdtree begins in a place of endings. Mohgwyn Palace, deep beneath the world, drenched in blood and darkness, is where we find the cocoon. In the base game, this strange chrysalis held Miquella, or so we believed. The withered arm extending from its surface seemed a tragic symbol of Morg's mad ambition, his twisted desire to elevate an Empyrean to godhood and claim him as consort. We defeated Morg, Lord of Blood, thinking we had ended his plans. we were wrong. We had in fact done exactly what we needed to do to begin the next chapter of this story. When you approach that cocoon after defeating both Morg and the mighty Star-Scourge Radahn in Caelid, something changes. The arm no longer seems quite so lifeless. Touch it, and the world shifts. Reality bends. You're pulled through dimensions, through the fabric separating what is from what was hidden, and you emerge in a cemetery unlike any other. This is the gravesite plain, and you have arrived in the land of shadow. The first thing you notice is the wrongness of it all. The sky is occluded, draped in what seems like a vast cloth or veil, obscuring everything beyond this realm. The landscape is familiar yet alien, with ruins that echo architectural styles from the lands between, but twisted, older, more primal. Spirit graves dot the terrain, these ethereal headstones marking deaths that accumulated over eons. And in the distance, dominating the horizon, stands not the golden Erdtree, but something darker. The Skadu tree, a massive shadow tree, burnt and blackened, yet still somehow alive. You're not alone here. Almost immediately you encounter others who have made this journey before you. They gather at a place called the Three Paths Cross, and they speak of Miquella with reverence that borders on worship. They call him kindly Miquella, Miquella the Kind, as though he were a savior rather than the eternally youthful Empyrean we remember from the base game, trapped in a childlike body by an unbreakable curse. The most prominent among these followers is Needle Knight Leader, a warrior of considerable skill who acts as a sort of guide, though her guidance comes with edges sharp as her blade. She explains that all of them have come here following Miquella, drawn by his promise of a gentler world, a new age free from the cruelties and curses that plague the lands between. They are pilgrims on a sacred journey, following in the footsteps of their beloved Lord as he travels toward some ultimate destination, some great purpose that will transform everything. But there's something odd about these followers. Their devotion seems absolute, unwavering, almost unnatural in its intensity. They speak of Miquella with an adoration that feels rehearsed, as though the words were written for them rather than chosen by them. More, a gentle being who wishes harm to no one, speaks of Miquella's compassion with tears in his eyes. Hornsent, a survivor of an ancient genocide, has somehow found common cause with followers of the Erdtree, natural enemies united by their faith in this one figure. Freya, a Redmane warrior loyal to Radahn, now serves Miquella instead. Ansbach, who once served Morg faithfully, has turned from his former lord to follow the Empyrean who, though you don't know it yet, charmed and manipulated Morg in the first place. Here's something you need to understand right now, something that will color everything that follows. These people don't actually have free will. Not completely. Miquella possesses an ability that From Software buried deep in item descriptions and carefully worded NPC dialogue, an ability so disturbing that it reframes his entire character. He can charm people, not inspire them, not persuade them. Charm them in the truest, most violating sense of the word. He imposes a supernatural compulsion that makes people love him, trust him, follow him, see him as the solution to all their problems. And every single pilgrim you meet has been under that spell. Now you won't learn this explicitly until later. Leader will eventually reveal it, casually mentioning that they were all charmed by Miquella's presence. But knowing this from the start changes how you see every interaction, every declaration of loyalty, every seemingly heartfelt profession of faith in Miquella's vision. These aren't willing followers making informed choices. These are people whose autonomy has been violated, their minds touched by power they couldn't resist, serving a plan they were compelled to serve rather than choosing to support. It's a kind of violation that makes even the most horrific body horror in From Software's catalog seem quaint by comparison. And it's happening to everyone around you, including, based on what we can infer from certain encounters, potentially even you, the Tarnished, though you seem more resistant than most. The Land of Shadow itself demands exploration. This is a realm of considerable size, with multiple distinct regions. Gravesite Plain gives way to Skadu Altus, a raised plateau shrouded in darkness and mist. To the south lies Cerulean Coast, where poisoned waters lap at shores that haven't seen sunlight in ages. Castle Ensis looms in the distance, guarded by Relana, Twin Moon Knight, a powerful warrior wielding both moon and flame. Beyond the castle, you'll find the Abyssal Woods, a place so steeped in dread and silence that even Torrent, your faithful spectral steed, refuses to enter. And above it all, visible from nearly every point in this shadow realm, stands Enir Ilim, a spiral tower reaching impossibly high into the veiled sky. That tower is your ultimate destination, the place where Miquella's journey ends and his transformation becomes complete. But before you can reach it, there are truths to uncover, histories to unearth, and a web of connections to untangle. One of the first major locations you discover is Belurat, Tower Settlement, an ancient city of the Hornsent. The architecture here is distinct, characterized by spiraling towers and heavy stone construction. This was once the heart of a civilization that predated the Golden Order, a people who worshipped something called the Crucible, the primordial form of the Erdtree before it was reshaped by Marika. The Hornsent were the dominant culture here, ruling through a combination of religious authority and martial power, commanding divine beasts and enforcing their will with brutal efficiency. But Belurat is not what it once was. The city is burned, scarred by flame, with bodies impaled on spikes littering the streets and ramparts. This is the work of Messmer the Impaler, and his crusade left nothing untouched. As you progress deeper into Belurat, you find evidence of the atrocities committed here. Furnace golems, massive constructs filled with living bodies as fuel, patrol the ruins. Black Knights, Messmer's elite soldiers, stand watch over the devastation. And everywhere you see the symbol of Messmer, a serpent coiled around a spear, often depicted with flames. The deeper you delve, the more you find structures that disturb rather than intrigue. You discover a place called Bonny Village, and it's here that the true horror begins to reveal itself. This was a village of the Hornsent, but not a military installation or religious center. This was a place of production, of ritual, of something that the Hornsent considered sacred, but which appears to modern eyes as pure nightmare. In Bonny Village, you find jars, living jars, those peculiar entities we encountered in the base game, with bodies fused together and stuffed into ceramic vessels. Alexander the Jar Warrior, Jar Bairn, these beings we befriended and helped, they all came from a process pioneered here. And that process was unspeakably cruel. The Hornsent believed that by taking multiple people, slicing them apart, and fusing their flesh together inside sacred jars, they could create beings of higher existence, saints blessed by their gods. They called it ascension. From outside their culture, from our perspective as the Tarnished walking through the ruins of their ambition, it looks like torture and murder dressed in religious justification. But who did they use for this ritual? That's the question that haunts this place. You find messages, ghostly echoes of conversations long past, and one in particular chills you to your core. A spirit speaks, addressing someone, and the words are precise. Your place is in the jar. For shamans like you, this is your lot. Shamans. That word appears again and again as you explore. The people who were subjected to these jar rituals, the victims of the Hornsent's sacred practices, were shamans. And you find equipment here that drives the point home with sickening clarity. The tooth whip, a weapon made from the jaw of some beast, with a description that mentions it was used on shamans. More disturbingly, it notes that the flesh of shamans was said to meld harmoniously with others, implying that their bodies had some unique property that made them ideal for the jar rituals. They weren't just killed, they were harvested, their very biology exploited for someone else's religious practices. Who were these shamans? Where did they come from? These questions pull at you as you continue exploring, and the answers, when they come, will recontextualize everything you thought you knew about Queen Marika, the Golden Order, and the entire history of the lands between. For now, though, your path leads onward. The pilgrims encourage you to continue following Miquella's trail. You cross bridges into regions more dangerous, fight through enemies both familiar and new. Fire knights wielding blessed flames guard key locations. Ghost flame dragons soar overhead. Furnace golems stride across the landscape like mobile crematoriums. And always in the back of your mind you wonder, what exactly is Miquella doing here? What is he abandoning? What is he becoming? The first real answer comes when you find one of his crosses and read the message attached. I abandon here my flesh. Then another. I abandon here my doubts and vacillations. And another. I abandon here my love. Each cross marks a step further along his path, a piece of himself deliberately left behind. It's a process of self-annihilation, undertaken willingly, in pursuit of some goal so important that Miquella is willing to cease being himself to achieve it. And then you hear it, that sound like glass shattering, resonating across the entire land of shadow, felt more than heard. A message appears. Somewhere a great rune has broken, and so too has a powerful charm. Everything shifts. The pilgrims, every single one of them, suddenly look confused, uncertain, as though waking from a long dream. The charm that Miquella cast on them, binding them to his will, has shattered along with his great rune. Now they must grapple with what they've done, where they've gone, and whether they truly wish to continue serving someone who manipulated them into devotion. Some of them remain loyal. Mor's gentle nature leads him to believe that Miquella's goals are still worthwhile, even if the means were questionable. Others begin to doubt. Hornsent especially starts to question whether following a child of Marika, the very woman who ordered the genocide of his people, is truly the path he wishes to walk. And Leda, perhaps the most devoted of all, becomes almost fanatical in her determination to see Miquella's plan through, willing to kill any of her former comrades who might stand in the way. This is where the pilgrimage truly begins to fracture, where alliance gives way to potential conflict, and where you must choose who to trust, who to help, and who to oppose. But before those conflicts come to a head, there are still secrets to uncover, still histories to learn. And the most important of those histories is hidden in a place that only reveals itself to those who know the right gesture to perform before a statue of Marika. We'll journey there next, to a village so small and humble that it barely deserves the name, yet so important that it holds the key to understanding everything that came after. We're going to the Shaman village to learn the truth about Queen Marika before she was a queen, before she was a goddess, when she was just a girl whose people were being systematically destroyed. But let's take a breath here. The path ahead is heavy with sorrow and revelation. When you're ready, we'll continue. To Part 2, Before the Golden Order, Marika's origin and the Shaman village. Deep within the land of shadow, hidden behind not one but 2 layers of concealment, lies a place that barely exists anymore. To reach it, You must first navigate to the Shadow Keep, the fortress where Messmer the Impaler has made his seat of power. From the back entrance of that keep, you find a statue of Marika, serene and divine in her depiction, and a message inscribed in the stone, "Have mercy for the spirited away shamans." If you perform the O Mother gesture before this statue, the statue itself moves aside, revealing a passage that leads out of the keep and into a hidden region called the Hinterlands. 2 tree sentinels guard the path forward, powerful foes that test your mettle before you can proceed. Beyond them, you cross a bridge into a landscape that seems almost untouched by time, still green and vibrant despite the shadow that hangs over this realm. And then you see it. The Shaman village. It's small, heartbreakingly small. Just a few houses, simple structures built with care, but without pretension. A dirt path winds between them. Flowers bloom in vivid colors, carpeting the hillside in beauty that seems almost defiant. And at the center of it all, illuminated by a shaft of light that somehow penetrates even the veil over this land, stands a small Erdtree sapling, glowing with soft golden radiance. There are no enemies here, no battles to fight, no bosses to conquer. Just silence, just absence. The village is completely empty, every house abandoned, every hearth cold. Walking through it feels less like exploration and more like trespassing on a grave, disturbing a memorial that was meant to remain undisturbed. At the base of the Erdtree sapling, you find an incantation, Minor Erdtree. Its description tells you something profound. Secret incantation of Queen Marika. Only the kindness of gold, without order, creates a small, illusory Erdtree that continuously restores the HP of nearby allies. Marika bathed the village of her home in gold, knowing full well that there was no one to heal. This was Marika's home, before she became the vessel for the Elden Ring, before she established the Golden Order and ruled the lands between as an eternal goddess queen. She lived here. This tiny, humble village was where she grew up, among people called Shamans, a community so small and insignificant that history would have forgotten them entirely, if not for what happened next. Climbing to the highest point of the village, you find a large tree with a hollow in its trunk. Inside that hollow is a statue of a woman with long hair, and beside it, another item, the golden braid talisman. The description is poignant. A braid of golden hair, cut loose. Queen Marika's offering to the grandmother. Boosts holy damage negation by the utmost. What was her prayer? Her wish? Her confession? The grandmother. This statue represents an elder of the village, someone Marika honored, someone she mourned. And the questions posed in that description cut deep. What did Marika pray for when she returned here and found everyone gone? What did she wish she could have done differently? What did she need to confess? To understand what happened here, we need to piece together information from multiple sources scattered throughout the Land of Shadow. We've already found clues in Bonnie Village, the Hornsent's jar-making facility. We know that shamans were the primary victims of the jar rituals, that their flesh had unique properties that made them valuable for this grotesque practice. Now we learn that Marika came from a community of shamans, and that everyone from her village disappeared. The picture becomes clearer. The Hornsent, the dominant civilization in this region before the rise of the Golden Order, regarded shamans as resources, not as people with rights and dignity, but as raw material for their sacred rituals. They captured shamans, transported them to places like Bonnie Village, and subjected them to tortures that the Hornsent genuinely believed were holy. They whipped them with weapons like the tooth whip. They sliced them apart. They stuffed their bodies into jars, sometimes mixing multiple people together, creating those living jar creatures in a process they called sainthood. The shamans of Marika's village were spirited away, a euphemism that barely conceals the horror of what actually happened. They were kidnapped, taken to Hornsent facilities, tortured, murdered, and transformed into components of living jars. Every single person from Marika's community, except for her, met this fate. Why was Marika spared? The answer likely lies in the fact that she was an Empyrean, chosen by the Two Fingers as a potential vessel for the Elden Ring. We don't know the exact circumstances of her selection, but being recognized as someone touched by cosmic power probably protected her from the fate that befell her people. The Hornsent might not have dared to harm someone marked by the greater will, or perhaps she escaped before they could capture her, fleeing her village and leaving her people to their doom. Either way, Marika survived. And she remembered. She remembered what the Hornsent did to her people, to her village, to everyone she had ever known. That memory would shape everything that came after. But before she could do anything about it, she needed power. She needed to become something more than a traumatized survivor of genocide. She needed to become a god. And to do that, she would need to reach a place at the very pinnacle of the Land of Shadow, a tower called Enir Ilim, where a gateway to divinity awaited those rare few who could survive the journey there. At some point in the timeline, years or perhaps decades after the destruction of her village, Marika succeeded. She reached Enir Ilim. She passed through the Gate of Divinity. She became the vessel for the Elden Ring, ascending to godhood and gaining power that dwarfed anything the Hornsent commanded. And with that power, she enacted her revenge. Marika didn't just defeat the Hornsent. She didn't simply conquer their lands and incorporate them into her new order. She set out to erase them completely. She wanted every Hornsent dead, every trace of their civilization burned away, every memory of their culture destroyed. It was genocide in return for genocide, divine wrath unleashed with the full force of a god who had very personal reasons for her hatred. But Marika couldn't do it herself, not directly. As a goddess, as the eternal vessel of the Elden Ring, she had an image to maintain. The Golden Order she was establishing needed to appear righteous, benevolent, a force for good in the world. She couldn't be seen personally leading armies to slaughter an entire civilization, no matter how much she might want to. So she found someone else to do it for her. She found a son willing to be her instrument, a child born cursed and hidden from the world, someone she could task with an unholy crusade and then disavow if necessary. She found Messmer. But before we turn to Messmer's story, we need to understand what happened to the Shaman village after Marika's ascension. At some point, after she had become a goddess and established her golden order in the lands between, Marika returned to this place. She came back to the empty village where she grew up, and she performed a ritual. She planted the Erdtree sapling. She infused the location with golden light, creating that minor Erdtree incantation, a spell of healing and restoration. But there was no one to heal. Everyone was gone, dead, transformed into jar creatures, or simply erased from existence. Marika knew this. She knew her blessing was futile, that her golden light would shine on an empty village forever. But she did it anyway, perhaps as an act of mourning, perhaps as a memorial, perhaps as a final confession of all the things she couldn't save. And then she left, and she never came back again. She sealed the path to the hinterlands behind a statue of herself, placed tree sentinels to guard the approach, and ensured that the Shaman village would remain hidden, a secret kept even from her own followers in the lands between. She erected a veil over the entire Land of Shadow, obscuring it from the world, making it impossible to reach except through very specific means. Everything that happened here, everything she came from, everything that shaped her into the goddess she became, she buried under layers of concealment and divine mandate. This is the truth that Shadow of the Erdtree reveals, and it changes everything we thought we understood about Marika. In the base game, she seemed enigmatic, a distant goddess whose motives were unclear. We knew she shattered the Elden Ring, triggering the Shattering War, but we didn't know why. Now we know that Marika's entire reign, everything she built, was founded on trauma and revenge. The Golden Order isn't just a religious and political structure. It's a monument to genocide, both suffered and enacted. And this knowledge casts a new light on so many things from the base game. Marika's treatment of her Omen children, Morgott and Morg, makes terrible sense now. They were born with horns, physical markers that made them resemble the horn scent, the very people who destroyed Marika's family and culture. No wonder she shunned them, locked them away beneath Leyndell, denied them recognition and love. Every time she looked at them, she must have seen echoes of her tormentors. The lengths she went to in hiding the Land of Shadow, in erasing all mention of Messmer from history, in keeping secrets even from her own consorts and children. All of this now has context. Marika wasn't just a goddess playing political games. She was a survivor trying to bury the evidence of her greatest crime, while simultaneously memorializing the crime that was committed against her. But what about Messmer himself? What kind of person was he? This son who carried out his mother's revenge and then was abandoned to live forever in the shadow of her shame. To understand that, we need to venture into the Shadow Keep, confront the man himself, and learn the story of the Crusade that burned the Hornsent civilization to ash. Take another breath. What comes next is a tale of a son's devotion and a mother's betrayal, of flames that purged thousands, and a curse that could never be lifted. When you're ready, we'll continue into the heart of Messmer's domain. Part 3. The Impaler's Crusade. Messmer and the War Unseen the Shadow. Keep dominates the landscape of Skadu Altus, a massive fortress that seems to have been built more to contain something than to defend against external threats. Its architecture is imposing, with high walls and heavy gates. But as you approach, you realize that many of the defenses face inward rather than outward, as though whoever designed this place was more concerned with what might escape from within than what might attack from without. Messmer the Impaler waits for you deep within this fortress, in a throne room drenched in red light and decorated with the symbols of his crusade. But to understand Messmer, we must first understand what he is and how he came to be the instrument of his mother's wrath. Messmer is Marika's son. That much is certain. He refers to her as mother, and every piece of evidence confirms the relationship. But his exact place in Marika's complicated family tree requires some interpretation. His red hair suggests Radagon as a potential father, a detail that becomes significant when you consider that Radagon's other children also share this trait. The fact that Messmer was born cursed, much like Miquella and Malenia, further supports this theory. Those twin Empyreans were explicitly stated to be cursed due to being children of a single god, the union of Marika and Radagon, who are somehow the same being. If Messmer shares their curse, it could imply he was also born of this same unusual parentage, though the timeline remains ambiguous. Some scholars of the lore suggest he might predate the public knowledge of Marika and Radagon's fusion, making him one of the first children born of their merged nature. Messmer's curse is unique and terrible. He was born with a serpent inside him, a creature he calls the Abyssal Serpent, an entity of darkness that constantly threatens to consume him from within. This serpent is no metaphor. It's a real, physical thing coiled around his core, eating away at him, trying to subsume his entire being and transform him into something monstrous. Marika, seeing her son afflicted with this curse, took drastic action. She removed one of Messmer's eyes, plucking it from his skull, and in the empty socket, she placed a seal of grace, a divine ward powered by her own godly essence. This seal contained the abyssal serpent, preventing it from taking over completely, but at a cost. Messmer would live forever in pain, forever aware of the thing inside him, forever one moment of weakness away from losing his humanity entirely. Why was Messmer born with this curse? The text doesn't provide a definitive answer, leaving room for interpretation based on what evidence we have. If Messmer is indeed Radagon's son, born during or after the complex merging of Marika and Radagon into a single being, then his curse might be a consequence of that unnatural union, similar to how Miquella and Millennia inherited their own afflictions. Some interpretations point to Marika's own origins as a shaman, suggesting her unique properties as someone whose flesh melds harmoniously with others might interact poorly with whatever Radagon contributed to the conception. Then again, it could simply be another instance of the universe punishing children for the circumstances of their birth, a running theme throughout Elden Ring's world. Whatever the cause, Messmer grew up knowing he was cursed, knowing he was different, knowing he carried something inside him that horrified even his divine mother. And yet, he remained loyal to her. When Marika needed someone to carry out her revenge against the Hornsent, someone who could wage a brutal campaign of extermination without mercy or hesitation, Messmer volunteered. Or perhaps volunteered is too kind a word. We don't know if Messmer chose this path or if Marika simply commanded it. But either way, Messmer became the leader of a crusade into the land of shadow, tasked with killing every Hornsent he could find and burning their civilization to the ground. The scope of this campaign is staggering. Messmer didn't just attack military targets, he went after everyone. Tower settlements that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble. Divine beasts that the Hornsent considered sacred were hunted down and slaughtered. Entire communities were put to the sword, and those who survived the initial assault were often impaled on spikes as warnings to others. Messmer earned his title, the Impaler, through actions that even by Elden Ring standards are remarkably brutal. He commanded an army for this task. The Black Knights, elite warriors clad in dark armor and wielding weapons blessed by Messmer's flame, formed the core of his forces. These knights were fanatically loyal to Messmer, following him into battle after battle, executing his orders without question. For years, decades, perhaps even centuries, they waged war in the land of shadow, implementing Marika's will with ruthless efficiency. But then something happened that Messmer didn't anticipate. His Black Knights discovered the truth about him. They learned about the abyssal serpent coiled inside their commander, the curse that made him something other than fully human. And when they discovered this, many of them revolted. They couldn't accept that the leader they had followed, the warrior they had respected, carried such darkness within him. Their faith shattered, and they turned against him. This betrayal wounded Messmer deeply, though he continued his crusade even after losing significant portions of his army. He had other forces at his disposal. Fire Knights, who wielded flames similar to his own, soldiers who remained loyal or who were simply too afraid to rebel, and the massive furnace golems, those walking crematoriums powered by bodies stuffed into their cores like fuel. And always, Messmer had his own power. Messmer Flame, a unique type of fire born from the abyssal serpent's influence, became his signature weapon. Unlike Holy Fire or Ghost Flame, or even the Chaos Flame of the Frenzied Flame, Messmer Flame carried a quality of absolute consumption. It didn't just burn, it annihilated. When Messmer's flame touched something, it ceased to exist in any meaningful sense, reduced to less than ash. The crusade continued for an immeasurable length of time. We know it happened before the shattering, before the events of the base game. but the exact timeline is murky. What we do know is that Messmer succeeded in his mission, more or less. The Hornsent civilization was destroyed. Their tower settlements lay in ruins. Their people were scattered, hiding in the wilderness, reduced from a dominant culture to a persecuted remnant. And through it all, Messmer waited for a sign from his mother. He waited for Marika to tell him the crusade was complete, that he had done enough, that he could come home. That sign never came. Instead, Marika sealed the land of shadow behind a veil, cutting off all contact with it, effectively abandoning everyone and everything within. Messmer included. Imagine being Messmer in that moment. You've spent years, decades, perhaps lifetimes carrying out your mother's will. You've become a monster in service of her revenge, killed thousands, maybe tens of thousands, earned a reputation as one of history's greatest villains. You've done terrible things, knowing that every horror you inflict is somehow justified because it's what your goddess mother commanded. And then suddenly she's gone. No word, no acknowledgement, no release from your duty, just silence. Eternal and complete. But Messmer didn't stop. Even knowing he'd been abandoned, even understanding that Marika had used him and then discarded him, he continued his vigil. He remained in the Shadow Keep, maintaining his army, enforcing the remnants of his crusade, fulfilling a duty that no longer had any meaning because the woman who assigned it to him would never return to see it completed. Why? Why continue serving someone who so thoroughly betrayed you? The answer might lie in the very nature of Messmer's curse. The abyssal serpent inside him isn't just a physical affliction. It represents doubt, darkness, the temptation to abandon duty and give in to chaos. Marika's seal keeps that serpent contained, but only just barely. If Messmer ever let go of his loyalty to his mother, ever allowed himself to truly acknowledge the full scope of her betrayal, the serpent might break free. So he clings to his duty as a kind of psychological armor, a way to keep himself human in the face of the monster trying to emerge from within. When you finally confront Messmer in his throne room, he greets you with resignation more than hostility. He's surprised to see a tarnished here, in the land of shadow, but he's not particularly interested in why you've come. He has his duty. You're an intruder. Therefore, he must eliminate you. It's almost mechanical, the way he approaches the fight, as though he's been going through these motions for so long that they've become reflexive. The battle is fierce. Messmer wields a spear with devastating skill, channeling his unique flame through every strike. He's fast, aggressive, relentless, attacking with combinations that leave little room for counterattacks. And all the while, you can see the serpent motifs in his movements, the way he coils and strikes, the way his attacks flow into each other like a serpent slithering across the ground. But then, something changes. Midway through the fight, when you've wounded him significantly, when victory seems within reach, Messmer does something unexpected. He reaches up to his face, to the eye that Marika sealed, and he rips it out. The seal breaks. The abyssal serpent surges forth, wrapping around Messmer's body, transforming him into a hybrid monstrosity. This is base serpent Messmer, the form he takes when he abandons his mother's grace and embraces the curse she tried so hard to suppress. And in that moment, as he tears away the seal, Messmer says something heartbreaking. He curses Marika, not with elaborate speeches or dramatic declarations, but with a simple, bitter acknowledgement that she abandoned him. All the loyalty, all the duty, all the terrible things he did in her name. And at the end, when he faces his own death, he finally admits the truth he's been denying for centuries. His mother used him and discarded him, and he knows it. And it destroys him even as he tries to destroy you. The second phase of the fight is even more challenging than the first. The Abyssal Serpent doesn't just enhance Messmer's powers, it transforms the nature of the battle entirely. He can now separate from the serpent, attacking you from multiple angles simultaneously. The serpent itself becomes an active combatant, striking with its fangs, coiling around you, trying to constrict and crush. It's a desperate, chaotic assault, the final attack of a being who has nothing left to lose. When you defeat Messmer, when you land that final blow and watch him fall, there's no triumph in it. He doesn't rage or threaten or promise revenge. He simply dies, and with him dies the last active remnant of Marika's crusade. The Shadowkeep falls silent. The flames that burned for centuries finally begin to gutter out. And you're left standing in a throne room surrounded by the symbols of a war that history will never remember, carried out by a son that his mother tried to erase from existence. Defeating Messmer grants you access to a critical item, Messmer's kindling. This is the key to burning the sealing tree that blocks the path to Enir Ilim, the tower at the center of everything, the place where Miquella's journey ends and where the final confrontation awaits. But it's also a symbol, a representation of how Marika's children are used as tools, as fuel, as sacrifices for plans they don't fully understand. Messmer isn't the villain of this story, despite everything he did. He's a victim. He's a child who was born wrong, cursed through no fault of his own, and then weaponized by his mother to carry out her revenge. He committed atrocities, yes, but he did so out of a twisted sense of duty to someone who never loved him enough to spare him from his fate. And when you kill him, you're not striking down evil. You're granting mercy to someone who suffered for far too long. This understanding is crucial for what comes next, because Messmer's story is a mirror, reflecting another child of Marika who is also pursuing a plan that requires sacrificing his own humanity. Miquella and Messmer are more alike than either probably realized. Both were born cursed. Both sought to transform the world according to their vision. Both were willing to do terrible things to achieve their goals. And both, in the end, lost themselves in the pursuit of something they believed was worth any price. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can confront Miquella, we need to follow his trail to its conclusion. We need to find the pieces he discarded, including the most painful one of all, the other half of himself, the embodiment of his love, the being called Saint Trina. And we need to understand the truth about the vow he made with Raden, the promise that set in motion everything that follows. Rest for a moment. The next part of our journey takes us deep underground into a fissure filled with poison and sleep, where a god's discarded love waits to deliver a final message. Part 4. The Discarded Love. Saint Trina and the Breaking of the Self. South of the Cerulean coast, at the very edge of the Land of Shadow, there's a hole in the ground. Not a cave, exactly, and not quite an abyss, but something in between. This is the entrance to the Stone Coffin Fissure, a deep crack in the earth that descends into darkness and poison, a place so unpleasant that even the most adventurous explorers hesitate before entering. But you must enter, because this is where Miquella abandoned his love, and without understanding what that means, you can never truly comprehend what Miquella has become. Interestingly, when you first discover this location, the entrance is sealed. There's a doorway marked with Miquella's symbol, but it won't open no matter what you do. You can stand before it, try every item and gesture in your arsenal, and nothing will grant you passage. This door will only open after a specific event occurs, an event tied directly to Miquella's journey of self-destruction. That event happens when you approach the Shadowkeep, or when you cross certain boundaries deeper in the Land of Shadow. Suddenly, you hear a sound like glass shattering, resonating across the entire realm, and a message appears. Somewhere a great rune has broken. and so too has a powerful charm. This is the moment when Miquella shatters his own great rune, completing his process of abandonment, severing his last connection to the Elden Ring and the power structures of the Golden Order. The breaking of the great rune has immediate consequences. All of Miquella's followers, those pilgrims we met at the beginning who spoke of him with such devotion, suddenly find themselves freed from his charm. The magical compulsion that bound them to his will dissipates, and they're left to grapple with the realization that everything they've done, every step of this pilgrimage, was undertaken while under a spell. Some of them are horrified. Others rationalize it, convince themselves that they would have followed him anyway. And a few, like Leda, become even more fanatically devoted, as though breaking free of the charm only proved how much they truly believe in his cause. But for you, the Tarnished, the breaking of the great rune means something else. The door to the stone coffin fissure is now open. Descending into the fissure is a journey through layers of decay and sleep. The walls are lined with graves, stone coffins stacked upon each other, each containing a body or perhaps just bones. Purple flowers bloom in the darkness, their petals glowing faintly, beautiful and deeply wrong. And everywhere, there's a thick miasma of sleep-inducing toxins, making it difficult to stay awake, to remain alert, to not simply succumb to dreams. Halfway down, you encounter the Putrescent Knight, a boss that guards the deeper reaches of this place. It's a grotesque creature, a knight whose body has been merged with something rotten, something that shouldn't exist. Defeating it grants passage deeper still, into a region called the Garden of Deep Purple, a vast cavern filled with those glowing flowers, their light casting everything in shades of violet and shadow. And there, at the very center of the garden, lying upon a bed of flowers, is Saint Trina. Or rather, what remains of Saint Trina. The being before you is barely recognizable as human. It's been shattered, broken apart, reduced to something less than a person. Flesh and form meld into the flowers, as though Saint Trina is dissolving into the garden itself, becoming part of the landscape rather than an entity distinct from it. And yet consciousness remains. Saint Trina can still speak, can still think, can still feel. When you approach, when you gather some of Saint Trina's nectar from the flowers and consume it, you hear a voice. It's weak, barely a whisper, but the words are clear. Saint Trina knows why you've come. She knows you're following Miquella, and she has a message she needs you to hear. But to understand that message, we first need to understand what Saint Trina is. In the base game, Saint Trina was mentioned in item descriptions, presented as a mysterious figure associated with sleep and dreams. Someone who granted peaceful slumber to those who called upon her. Many players assumed Saint Trina was a minor goddess, or perhaps a saint in the traditional religious sense. The truth is far more complex. Saint Trina is Miquella's other half. Just as Radagon and Marika are two aspects of one being, just as Malekith and Gurranq are the same entity perceived differently, Saint Trina and Miquella are two personalities inhabiting one body. Or they were, before Miquella began his journey of self-destruction. This duality seems to be a trait of powerful beings in Elden Ring's world, particularly those touched by godhood or divinity. It's as though the universe can't quite contain such entities in a single, unified form, so they split, becoming two distinct personalities that somehow coexist. For Miquella and Saint Trina, the split was perhaps between ambition and contentment, between the drive to change the world and the acceptance of things as they are. Miquella was always the active principle, the one who experimented with unalloyed gold, tried to cure his sister's scarlet rot, created the Erdtree, and pursued Godhood with relentless determination. Saint Trina was the passive principle, the one who offered rest, who granted sleep, who represented acceptance and peace. Together, they were whole. Separately, they became something less, something broken. And Miquella chose to break them apart. As part of his journey to godhood, as part of his process of shedding everything that made him himself, Miquella separated from Saint Trina and left her behind in this fissure. He abandoned his love, his capacity for peace, his acceptance of the world as it is. He kept only his ambition, only his drive to transform everything, only the parts of himself that could pursue godhood without hesitation or doubt. This is what Saint Trina means when you find one of Miquella's crosses near the entrance to the fissure, the cross that bears the message, "I abandon here my love." It's not romantic love for another person, though that's certainly part of it. It's love as a fundamental capacity, the ability to care about things for their own sake rather than for what they can contribute to a grand plan. Miquella threw that away. Saint Trina's message to you, delivered through multiple encounters with her nectar-induced dreams, is both simple and profound. She tells you that godhood will be Miquella's prison, that becoming a god, transforming into something divine and eternal, will trap him in a role he can never escape. She says he should be killed, that death would be a mercy compared to the cage of divinity. And she asks you, pleads with you, to grant him that mercy when the time comes. This is stunning for several reasons. First, Saint Trina is still part of Miquella, still connected to him despite the separation. She can feel what's happening to him, understand where his path leads, see the future that awaits if he succeeds in his plan. And what she sees horrifies her enough that she would rather he die than achieve what he thinks he wants. Second, she's still loyal. Even after being abandoned, even after being left to dissolve in this underground garden, even after being discarded like a broken tool, Saint Trina cares about Miquella enough to try to save him from himself. It's a twisted kind of love, born from the impossible situation of being two parts of one being, but it's love nonetheless. Third, her message is a warning about the nature of godhood itself. Throughout Elden Ring, we've seen what happens to gods. Marika was imprisoned within the Erdtree, crucified on a rune ark, punished by the very power she served. The gloam-eyed queen was defeated and her powers sealed away. The outer gods, like the god of rot or the formless mother, seem to be trapped in their own natures, unable to change or grow or become anything other than what they fundamentally are. Godhood in this universe isn't freedom or power in any meaningful sense. It's calcification, the eternal freezing of identity into a single unchanging form. Miquella believes that becoming a god will allow him to create a better world, an age of compassion free from the cycles of violence and cruelty that define the Golden Order. Saint Trina knows that becoming a god will simply trap him in a new cycle, that he'll become another tyrant even if he starts with good intentions, because that's what godhood does to people in this universe. You can take Saint Trina's words to an NPC named Theolier, a man who has dedicated himself to serving Saint Trina, who found purpose and meaning in her cult of sleep. When you tell him what she said, he's devastated, but ultimately accepts it. He recognizes that Saint Trina's wisdom must be heeded, even if it means opposing Miquella's plans. And in the end, you may face Theolier as an invader, someone who has chosen to fight you because he believes you might spare Miquella when the time comes. And he knows that Miquella must die to be saved from the prison of godhood. But what can you do with this information? The choice, as always in Elden Ring, is yours. You can take Saint Trina's warning to heart, Resolve to stop Miquella before he completes his transformation. Or you can ignore her, press forward, see his plan through to completion, and judge for yourself whether the Age of Compassion is worth the price he's paying. Either way, you must continue forward. You've learned about Marika's origins, about Messmer's crusade, about St. Trina's warning. Now you need to understand the final piece of Miquella's plan, the aspect that connects to the base game in ways you probably didn't anticipate. You need to learn about the vow, about Radahn, about a promise made years before the shattering and honored in the most twisted way imaginable. But before we dive into that revelation, take a moment. The story we're telling grows darker with each layer we peel back. The next section will show us that even the kindest intentions, even the most genuine desire to help, can become monstrous when pursued without limit. When you're ready, we'll continue. Part 5. The Promised Consort, Radahn, Morg, and Miquella's grand design. Let's revisit a moment from Elden Ring's base game. You're in Caelid, that scarlet-rotted wasteland, fighting your way through an endless parade of hostile enemies toward Redmane Castle. Eventually, you reach the castle and discover that a festival is underway, the Uninterrupted Radahn Festival, organized by Jeren to give the great general an honorable death. You join forces with multiple champions, ascend to the arena, and face Star Scourge Radahn himself. The fight is memorable for many reasons. Radahn's sheer size and power, the way he uses gravity magic to ride a tiny horse that shouldn't be able to support his weight, the meteor attack where he becomes a shooting star and crashes down upon you. But perhaps the most memorable moment comes if you know where to look in the official story trailer from 2021. There's a sequence showing Malenia and Radahn's battle, and if you watch closely, you can see Malenia's lips moving, whispering something into Radahn's ear just before she unleashes her Scarlet Aeonia bloom. At the time, we had no idea what she was saying. We assumed it was some taunt, some final declaration of superiority before she infected him with the rot. Now, thanks to Shadow of the Erdtree, we know exactly what she whispered. Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort. Those words change everything. They transform Malenia and Radahn's battle from a simple clash of demigods into part of a far larger plan, one that Miquella set in motion years before the events of the base game even began. To understand this plan, we need to talk about what it means to become a god in Elden Ring's universe. When Marika ascended to godhood, she didn't do it alone. She had Godfrey as her Elden Lord, her consort, the warrior whose strength complemented her divine power. This seems to be a requirement, or at least a strong tradition. Gods need consorts, perhaps to anchor them to the world, perhaps to provide the military might necessary to enforce their will, perhaps for some deeper cosmic reason that the game doesn't fully explain. If Miquella wanted to become a god, he would need a consort, and not just anyone would do. The consort of a god needs to be extraordinarily powerful, someone whose capabilities match the scale of divinity itself. Miquella surveyed the demigods of his generation, the children and grandchildren of Marika, and made his choice. He chose Radahn, the Red Lion General, the mighty warrior who held back the stars themselves with his gravitational magic, the demigod who earned a reputation as the strongest of his generation. Why Radahn specifically? The remembrance of a god and a lord, which you receive after defeating the final boss of Shadow of the Erdtree, provides some insight. It notes that Miquella admired Radahn's qualities, particularly his strength and his nature as someone truly alive, something Miquella himself could never be due to his curse of eternal youth. Radahn was everything Miquella was not: powerful, commanding, charismatic in the way that inspires loyalty through respect rather than supernatural charm. He was the perfect complement to what Miquella would become as a god. At some point before the shattering, when both Miquella and Radahn were younger, Miquella approached his half-brother with a proposal. We see this moment in a memory that you can access after defeating the final boss. Young Miquella, still in a child's form, speaks to young Radahn, who appears as a warrior in training. The words are crucial. Lord Brother, I'm going to be a god. If we honor our part of the vow, promise me you'll be my consort. I'll make the world a gentler place. This dialogue reveals several important things. First, there was a vow, an agreement between Miquella, and probably Malenia, given the "we" in his statement, and Radahn. Second, this vow had two parts, something Miquella and Malenia promised to do for Radahn, and Radahn's agreement to become Miquella's consort in return. Third, Miquella was already planning his ascension to godhood even before the shattering, making this scheme one of the longest-running plots in the entire story. What was the vow? What did Miquella promise Radahn? The game doesn't spell it out explicitly, but we can make educated inferences based on what we know about Radahn's character and the evidence presented. Radahn Asen was a warrior above all else, someone who lived for battle and honorable combat. His entire identity centered on martial prowess and conquest. The greatest shame that could befall him would be to die a meaningless death, or, worse, to live on in diminished form, reduced to a mindless beast consumed by scarlet rot. Here's where things get genuinely disturbing, where the puzzle pieces come together in ways you don't see coming until it's too late. When you defeat promised consort Radahn at the end of Shadow of the Erdtree, you can purchase the Young Lion armor set, the armor Radahn wore in his youth. Read the description carefully, because buried in that flavor text is a revelation that recontextualizes the entire battle between Malenia and Radahn from the base game. The description states, "When Malenia, blade of Miquella, let the rot flower blossom in Aeonia, Radahn heard a murmur in his ear. Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort." Do you understand what this means? Malenia whispered those words to Radahn as she infected him with scarlet rot. That iconic battle in Caelid, presented in the base game as a stalemate between two mighty demigods, was actually an assassination. Malenia was there to kill Radahn, to deliver him to death so that his soul could be used in Miquella's plan. The scarlet rot wasn't a desperate last resort, or a sign that Malenia was losing. It was the plan all along. She came to Caelid specifically to give Radahn the warrior's death he was promised, to fulfill the first part of the vow, and to remind him in his final moments that Miquella was waiting for him to complete the second part, becoming his consort in godhood. If you go back to Elden Ring's 2021 story trailer right now and watch the sequence showing their battle, you can actually see it. Watch Malenia's lips. She's whispering something to Radahn right before the Scarlet Aeonia blooms. From Software, buried this critical piece of information in a single armor description and a barely visible animation from a trailer released years before the DLC. That's the level of detail we're working with here. That someone was you, the Tarnished. When you defeated Radahn in the festival, when you struck down the mighty general and ended his suffering, you completed the first part of Miquella's plan. You gave Radahn his honorable death, and in doing so, you freed his soul to be used in the second part of the plan, the part that required resurrection and a suitable vessel. This is where Morg enters the story, though his role is perhaps the most tragic of anyone involved. Morg, Lord of Blood, the Omen twin who embraced his curse and sought power through an outer god called the Formless Mother, discovered Miquella's cocoon in the Halig tree. He carved Miquella out of the tree, brought him to Morgwyn Palace, and began a ritual to elevate Miquella to godhood with Morg himself as consort. For years, we believed this was Morg's plan, his obsession, his twisted ambition. Shadow of the Erdtree reveals that Morg was under Miquella's charm the entire time. Sir Ansbach, an NPC who served Morg faithfully, explains that his lord was bewitched, his mind dominated by Miquella's supernatural ability to inspire devotion. Everything Morg did, from carving Miquella out of the Haligtree to performing the blood rituals in his palace, was done under Miquella's influence, serving Miquella's plan rather than his own ambitions. Why did Miquella need Morg? 2 reasons. First, to gain entrance to the Land of Shadow. There was a specific method required to breach the veil Marika had erected, and Morg's actions somehow facilitated that breach, perhaps through the blood rituals, perhaps through something else entirely. Second, and more importantly, Miquella needed Morg's body as a vessel for Radan's soul. This is the revelation that shocked players when they reached the end of Shadow of the Erdtree. The final boss isn't Miquella alone. It's promised consort Radan, the great general reborn into Morg's body, wielding both gravitational magic and the blood flame that Morg commanded, serving as the warrior consort for Miquella's apotheosis into godhood. Think about how cold, how calculated, how monstrous this plan is. Miquella manipulated Morg for years, possibly decades, dominating his mind and forcing him to perform rituals that served no purpose except to prepare his body as a vessel. Morg thought he was pursuing his own ambitions, trying to elevate Miquella as his consort, when in reality he was just a puppet being positioned for sacrifice. When Morg died at your hands, when you defeated the Lord of Blood as a requirement for accessing the DLC, you were again serving Miquella's plan, clearing away the obstacle so that Radan's soul could inhabit the prepared vessel. And what about Radan himself? Did he truly consent to all of this? Did he understand that honoring the vow would mean being resurrected in his half-brother's body, stripped of his original form, turned into an instrument for someone else's ascension? This question has generated considerable debate within the lore community, and the answer remains tantalizingly ambiguous. The evidence points in multiple directions. The young lion armor description suggests Radan heard Millennia's whisper, implying some level of awareness about what was happening. Yet consider this. Radan fought Millennia to a stalemate before she resorted to the scarlet rot bloom. If he willingly accepted his role in the plan, why fight so hard? Why resist to the point that Millennia had to use her most devastating attack? This could suggest reluctance, that perhaps the vow wasn't as mutual as Miquella's memory makes it seem. Further complicating matters is Radan's silence in the DLC itself. Unlike many bosses, he speaks no words, offers no acknowledgement of Miquella's claims about their relationship, gives no indication of willing participation. This absence of voice is conspicuous for someone supposedly fulfilling an ancient promise. Some interpret this silence as evidence that Radan's will has been subsumed entirely, that whatever remained of his consciousness after resurrection has been dominated by Miquella's charm, or simply erased by the violence of being stuffed into Morg's body. The most disturbing interpretation, and one that feels increasingly likely given everything else we learn, is that consent itself becomes meaningless when someone possesses Miquella's ability to charm. Even if Radan initially agreed to the vow, even if young Radan genuinely promised to become Miquella's consort, how can we trust that agreement when we know Miquella can make people believe things they wouldn't otherwise believe? The very existence of his charm ability casts doubt on every relationship he forms, every alliance he makes, every promise extracted from those around him. These are uncomfortable questions, and they're meant to be. Shadow of the Erdtree asks us to examine the nature of Miquella's kindness, his compassion, his desire to create a better world, and recognize that none of those good intentions excuse the methods he employs. A gentler world built on manipulation, on violated autonomy, on using people as tools and then discarding them. Is that really better than the Golden Order's more overt cruelties? But we're not quite done with this section. There's one more crucial piece of information we need to address: the mechanics of Radahn's resurrection and what it means for the final confrontation. When you reach Enir Ilim, the tower at the center of everything, when you ascend to the Gate of Divinity at its peak, you find Miquella waiting. But he's not alone. Promised consort Radahn stands before the gate, massive and imposing, wielding two great swords and surrounded by an aura of gravitational force and blood flame. This is Radahn Assas Reborn, Radahn in his prime, more dangerous than the rotted husk you fought in Caelid. The fight begins, and immediately you realize this is one of the most challenging encounters in the entire game. Radahn's attacks come at you relentlessly, combining his original gravitational magic with new blood-based abilities. He can pull you toward him, launch you into the air, create zones of crushing gravity, summon spectral blades, and coat his weapons in blood flame that inflicts hemorrhage. It's a brutal, unforgiving battle that tests everything you've learned. But then, about halfway through the fight, something changes. Miquella himself enters the battle. He emerges from behind Radahn in a radiant burst of light, ascending from his cocoon fully formed, achieving apotheosis in the midst of the conflict. He latches on to Radahn's back, merging with him, and Radahn's title changes from Promised Consort Radahn to Radahn, Consort of Miquella. The change isn't just cosmetic. It represents the completion of their union, the marriage of god and consort, the moment when Miquella fully ascends to godhood, and Radahn becomes even more dangerous. Now his attacks carry holy damage in addition to physical, gravitational, and blood-based harm. Miquella actively participates in the fight, casting supportive spells, healing Radahn, occasionally attacking you directly with beams of light. The arena fills with visual effects, golden halos and blood-red crescents, gravity wells and holy stars, a cacophony of power that threatens to overwhelm your senses as much as your defenses. There's also a mechanic specific to this fight that you need to understand. During the second phase, Radahn will occasionally perform a grab attack. If this attack connects, Miquella charms you, applying a debuff marked by a glowing symbol on your head. If you get grabbed a second time while this debuff is active, you die instantly. It's not a health drain or a status effect that can be healed. You simply die, no matter how much health you have, no matter what defenses you've built. This mechanic serves two purposes. From a gameplay perspective, it forces you to play carefully, to avoid a specific attack at all costs, adding tension to an already difficult fight. From a narrative perspective, it represents Miquella's charm in action, his ability to dominate minds and impose his will. Even you, the mighty Tarnished who has defeated gods and claimed great runes, can be brought under his control if you're not careful. Fortunately, there's a counter. Remember Miquella's great rune, the one you obtained by defeating the Scadutry Avatar earlier in the DLC? That broken rune, bereft of its original power, retains one capability: the ability to resist charms. If you get charmed during the fight, you can use the rune to clear the debuff, removing the glowing symbol and resetting the instant death mechanic. It's a small advantage, but in a fight this difficult, every advantage matters. The battle is long and grueling, demanding perfect execution and endless patience. But eventually, finally, you land the killing blow. Radahn falls. Miquella dissipates, his form scattering into motes of light, his apotheosis incomplete. The would-be god is defeated, his age of compassion prevented, his grand plan brought to ruin. And in the aftermath, you can access one final memory, a vision of that moment when young Miquella made his proposal to young Radan. You watch the scene play out, see the vow made, hear the promises exchanged, and perhaps, seeing it all laid out clearly, you begin to understand both the tragedy and the necessity of what you've just done. Miquella meant well. He genuinely wanted to create a better world, to fix the cruelties and injustices of the Golden Order, to usher in an age where compassion governed instead of conquest. But he was willing to pay any price, make any sacrifice, violate any boundary to achieve that goal. He abandoned his love, manipulated his followers, used his half-brothers as tools, discarded pieces of himself until he was barely recognizable as the person he once was. And in the end, the world he sought to create would have been built on a foundation of coercion and violated autonomy. A gentler tyranny, perhaps, but tyranny nonetheless. Saint Trina was right. Godhood was his prison, and death, delivered by your hand, was the only mercy available. Take a breath. We're nearing the end of this journey, but there are still threads to tie together, still implications to explore. The next section will examine the broader themes of Shadow of the Erdtree, what this story reveals about cycles of revenge, the cost of divinity, and the eternal question of whether good intentions can ever justify monstrous means. Part 6. The Weight of Divinity. Themes and revelations. Shadow of the Erdtree is many things. It's an expansion. It's a continuation of Elden Ring's story. It's a series of challenging boss fights and sprawling areas to explore. But perhaps most importantly, it's a meditation on the nature of divinity, revenge, and the terrible costs of pursuing an ideal without compromise. Let's start with the theme that ties all of Shadow of the Erdtree's stories together: the cycle of revenge and how it perpetuates itself across generations. Marika's story begins with genocide. Her people, the shamans of that humble village, were systematically destroyed by the Hornsent, tortured and transformed in service of religious rituals. Marika survived, ascended to godhood, and then enacted her own genocide in return, sending Messmer to burn the Hornsent civilization to the ground. The cycle continues. But Marika didn't just enact revenge. She tried to hide it, to erase the evidence of what she'd done, to present the Golden Order as something pure and righteous, rather than something born from trauma and retribution. She sealed away the land of shadow, abandoned Messmer, scrubbed all mention of her crusade from history. She wanted the power that came from her revenge, without having to acknowledge the cruelty of her actions. And what did this accomplish? It ensured that her children would inherit her sins without understanding them. Morgott and Morg, born with horns that resembled the Hornsent, were shunned and hidden away not because of anything they did, but because their very existence reminded Marika of her trauma. Messmer, used as the instrument of her revenge, was abandoned to suffer in isolation, his curse unresolved, his duty unfulfilled. Miquella, seeing the cruelties of the Golden Order and recognizing that something was fundamentally wrong, set out to fix things without understanding the full context of how they became this way. None of Marika's children had the information they needed to break the cycle. They only saw the effects, the cruelties and contradictions of the Golden Order, and they responded by perpetuating more of the same. Miquella's attempt to create a gentler world through manipulation and coercion is just another turn of the wheel, another attempt to impose order through power, different in degree perhaps, but not in kind from what Marika did. This connects to another major theme: the nature of godhood itself, and whether it's possible to be a god without becoming a tyrant. Throughout Shadow of the Erdtree, we see what godhood actually means in this universe. It's not freedom or unlimited power in any positive sense. It's calcification, the freezing of identity into a single, unchanging role. Marika became the Eternal, locked into her position as the vessel for the Elden Ring, unable to escape even when she desperately wanted to, eventually imprisoned within the Erdtree as punishment for trying to shatter the system that constrained her. Saint Trina understood this. When she tells you that Godhood will be Miquella's prison, she's speaking from direct insight into what the transformation entails. Miquella believes that becoming a god will give him the power to fix everything, to create the age of compassion he envisions. Saint Trina knows that becoming a god will trap him in the role of God, capital G, forcing him to embody his own ideal so completely that he'll lose the flexibility, the humanity, the capacity for growth and change that makes improvement possible. Consider what Miquella had to abandon to achieve godhood. His flesh, making him incorporeal, disconnected from physical reality. His doubts and vacillations, removing his ability to question whether he's on the right path. His love, eliminating his capacity to care about individuals rather than abstractions. His fear, destroying the healthy caution that prevents people from pursuing terrible plans. One by one, he stripped away the aspects of himself that made him capable of wisdom, leaving only pure ambition aimed at a singular goal. By the time he reaches the gate of divinity, by the time he achieves his apotheosis, Miquella is barely himself anymore. He's become an idea, a principle, a force of nature rather than a person. And if you hadn't stopped him, if his plan had succeeded completely, he would have been frozen in that state forever. The compassionate God who rules through coercion, the kind tyrant who removes everyone's ability to choose their own path. This is why so many of the game's factions and characters are ultimately tragic rather than villainous. The Hornsent believed they were creating saints through their jar rituals, genuinely thought they were elevating people to higher existence. They were wrong, monstrously wrong, but they acted out of religious conviction rather than pure malice. Marika enacted genocide against them, and from her perspective, it was justice. It was protecting future generations of shamans from the same fate she narrowly escaped. She was also wrong, responding to trauma with overwhelming violence, but her actions came from a place of genuine suffering. Messmer carried out the Crusade because he believed in his mother, because he thought his curse could be redeemed through service, because loyalty to family was the last thing keeping him human in the face of the abyssal serpent. He committed atrocities, yes, but he didn't do it for pleasure or power. He did it out of duty to someone who ultimately betrayed him. And Miquella, kindly Miquella, the character who inspired such devotion and hope, pursued a plan that required using everyone around him as tools, that demanded he abandon everything that made life worth living in exchange for the power to impose his vision on the world. He meant well. He genuinely wanted to help. And that makes his story more tragic, not less, because good intentions combined with absolute determination can create outcomes just as terrible as overt malice. There's also a theme here about the nature of consent and autonomy, particularly as it relates to Miquella's charm. This is perhaps the most subtle and disturbing aspect of his character. He has the ability to make people love him, trust him, follow him, and he uses that ability freely, apparently seeing no ethical problem with removing people's capacity to choose. From Miquella's perspective, this probably seems like a good thing. He's not forcing people to do things they wouldn't want to do. He's making them want to do things that are, in his view, actually in their best interest. He's helping them overcome their own limitations, their prejudices, their fears, allowing them to unite in common cause toward a better world. What could be wrong with that? Everything. Everything is wrong with that. The moment you remove someone's ability to choose, The moment you impose your will on their mind, you've violated them in one of the most fundamental ways possible. It doesn't matter if your intentions are good. It doesn't matter if the outcome you're pursuing is genuinely better than the alternative. The process itself is the problem, the violation of autonomy, the reduction of people to tools that can be programmed to serve your purpose. And this connects to a broader question the game asks. Can good outcomes justify terrible means? If Miquella had succeeded, if the age of compassion had been established, would that retroactively justify all the manipulation, all the violated minds, all the people used and discarded along the way? Or does the process matter more than the outcome, such that a world achieved through coercion is inherently corrupt no matter how gentle it appears on the surface? Shadow of the Erdtree doesn't provide easy answers to these questions. Instead, it presents the situation in all its complexity and asks you to engage with it, to think about it, to form your own conclusions. This is what makes it more than just an expansion with new areas and bosses. It's a philosophical inquiry wrapped in gameplay, asking profound questions about morality, power, and the pursuit of ideals. There's one more major revelation we need to discuss, and it might be the most fundamental truth Shadow of the Erdtree unveils. One that doesn't just recontextualize the DLC, but completely upends your understanding of the entire base game. This concerns the two fingers, the greater will, and the true nature of the cosmic order that supposedly governs this universe. Remember in the base game how the two fingers served as intermediaries between you and the greater will? They provided guidance, explained your mission as a tarnished, pointed you toward the path of becoming Elden Lord. They were presented as authoritative figures, entities with direct connection to the cosmic powers that shaped reality. The finger readers translated their gestures, and everyone from Enia to various NPCs treated their words as absolute divine truth. Shadow of the Erdtree, through an optional quest involving Count Ymir and the revelation of a hidden boss, reveals something that fundamentally breaks that entire framework. The two fingers don't have a direct connection to the greater will. They never did. Not during your journey. Possibly not for centuries. Maybe not ever since Marika became a god. Here's what actually happened, pieced together from item descriptions and environmental storytelling in areas most players will miss. The two fingers aren't the original entities. They're offspring of something called Meteor, Mother of Fingers. Meteor was the first being sent by the greater will to the lands between, tasked with serving as a relay station, a cosmic communications hub transmitting the will of that distant outer god to her children, who would then guide the chosen Empyreans and their followers. But at some point, and the game is deliberately vague about when, the greater will stopped communicating. The signal went dead. The cosmic phone line disconnected. We don't know why. We don't know if the greater will lost interest, ascended to something beyond communication, got trapped in its own nature, or simply never cared as much as everyone believed it did. What we know is that Meta, unable to fulfill her purpose, driven mad by the absence of the voice she was created to hear, continued trying desperately to re-establish contact. And the two fingers, her children? They never knew. They continued acting as though they had clear instructions, as though they understood the greater will's purpose, when in reality they were following outdated protocols, making educated guesses based on incomplete information, and essentially improvising divine guidance while pretending to have certainty. Think about what this means. Everything the Golden Order was built on, every prophecy the two fingers delivered, every instruction they gave to Marika and her successors, every bit of guidance they provided to you as you fought your way to the Erdtree, all of it was based on silence, on absence, on entities who lost contact with their purpose generations ago and have been pretending to know what they're doing ever since, trapped in roles they can no longer fulfill but unable to admit it. The Elden Ring you fought to repair. The Elden Lord you struggled to become. The entire metaphysical structure of reality in the lands between. It might all be nothing more than the improvised responses of abandoned children who couldn't bear to admit their parent stopped talking to them. And this connects back to the theme of divinity as prison we've been exploring, because the evidence suggests that the greater will itself might be trapped in a similar way. Perhaps it too is frozen, calcified into a role it can no longer fulfill, as much a prisoner as Marika or as Miquella would have been if his apotheosis had succeeded. The pattern repeats at every level. Gods trapped by godhood, servants trapped by duty to absent masters, entire civilizations following mandates from authorities who may never have possessed the wisdom everyone attributed to them. Shadow of the Erdtree presents a universe where everyone, from the humblest shaman to the greatest god, is trapped in cycles they don't understand, following patterns established by traumas they can't remember, pursuing goals that were handed to them by authorities who don't actually have the answers they claim to possess. It's a vision of existence as inherently tragic, where suffering perpetuates itself not because anyone actively wants it to, but because the systems that govern reality are themselves broken, and no one has the perspective to step outside them and see the dysfunction clearly. Except perhaps you, the Tarnished. You're outside the system, dead and then revived, called back from beyond grace to a world that doesn't know what to do with you. You're not bound by the same constraints as the demigods or the Two Fingers or even Marika herself. You can choose your path, reject the prophecies, kill gods when necessary, and forge new outcomes that weren't part of anyone's plan. And that's why you're the one who stops Miquella. Not because you're stronger, necessarily, though you do defeat him in combat, but because you're free in a way he never could be. You can see his plan clearly, recognize its flaws, and choose to oppose it, even if his age of compassion might genuinely be an improvement over the alternatives. You're the agent of chaos in a system that desperately needs chaos to break the cycles that trap everyone else. This is the final theme Shadow of the Erdtree offers: the necessity of freedom, even messy, uncertain freedom over any imposed order, even one that promises compassion and peace. The game argues, through its story and its mechanics, that choice matters more than outcome, that the journey matters more than the destination, that living authentically as yourself, flaws and all, is preferable to being transformed into someone else's ideal of what you should be. And with that understanding, we can finally approach the end of this journey, tying together all the threads we've followed through the Land of Shadow, examining what Shadow of the Erdtree ultimately means for Elden Ring as a whole. Part 7. The Shadow That Remains. Conclusion and final thoughts. We've walked a long path together through this shadow-draped realm. We've seen the origins of a goddess in a village too small to leave ruins worth remembering. We've witnessed a son's devotion twisted into eternal abandonment, flames that purged a civilization from history, and a crusade that no songs will ever commemorate. We've followed a kindly demigod as he discarded everything he was in pursuit of an ideal, leaving pieces of himself scattered across a forgotten land like breadcrumbs leading to his own annihilation. Shadow of the Erdtree is not a happy story. From Software has never specialized in happy stories, but this expansion goes further than most of their work in presenting a universe where tragedy isn't just a plot point, but a fundamental law of existence. Everyone suffers. Everyone makes choices that lead to more suffering. Everyone tries to break cycles and ends up perpetuating them in new forms. And the only escape, the only moment of genuine freedom, comes through destruction, through stopping plans before they can reach completion, through mercy that looks like murder. But within that darkness, there are moments of light. More The gentle follower who wishes harm to no one maintains his compassion even after learning he was charmed. Theolia finds purpose in serving Saint Trina finds meaning in her message, even though it means opposing the plan he was supposed to support. Sir Ansbach seeks to honor Morg's memory, to give his lord the dignity in death that was denied him in life. And you, the Tarnished, show that it's possible to move through this world without becoming another tyrant, another manipulator, another link in the endless chain of revenge and violence. The expansion also completes Elden Ring's story in ways that the base game left ambiguous. We now know Marika's full history, understand why she shattered the Elden Ring, see the contradictions and traumas that shaped her into the enigmatic goddess we spent the base game trying to understand. We know what Miquella was pursuing when he left the Erdtree, why Morg brought him to Morgwyn Palace, what Millennia's whisper to Radahn truly meant. The puzzle that seemed incomplete now has all its pieces visible, even if the final picture they create is darker and more complex than we anticipated. Some players have criticized Shadow of the Erdtree for making Miquella a villain, for taking a character who seemed purely benevolent in the base game and revealing him to be manipulative and morally compromised. But I think that criticism misses the point. Miquella isn't a villain in any traditional sense. He's a tragedy, a demonstration of how good intentions without ethical boundaries become indistinguishable from evil. His story is a warning about the pursuit of perfection, the dangers of believing that any outcome, no matter how good, justifies any means necessary to achieve it. Similarly, Marika's backstory doesn't excuse her actions, but it does help us understand them. She's not evil for the sake of being evil. She's a survivor of genocide who gained godlike power and used it to ensure that what happened to her people would never happen again. She went too far, crossed lines that should never be crossed, created new cycles of suffering in her attempt to end old ones. But her journey from traumatized survivor to tyrannical goddess is comprehensible, even relatable. And that makes it more powerful than if she were simply a stock villain with no sympathetic qualities. The expansion also excels in environmental storytelling, using locations and architecture to convey information that supplements and sometimes challenges what we're told through dialogue and item descriptions. The Shaman village's humble simplicity contrasts sharply with the grandeur of Einir Ilim, showing us the distance Marika traveled both literally and metaphorically. Bonny Village's grotesque jars and torture implements need no explanation. You understand what happened there simply by looking at it. The Shadowkeep's defensive posture, built to contain rather than protect, tells you everything about Messmer's situation before you even meet him. And then there's Einir Ilim itself, the spiral tower reaching impossibly high, its architecture dreamlike and distorted, its very existence seeming to differ physical laws. This is where gods are made, where the transition from mortal to divine occurs, and the location itself feels wrong, feels like it shouldn't exist, like reality is bending under the weight of its own significance. Climbing that tower, ascending through its warped corridors and impossible geometries, you feel the wrongness of what you're approaching, understand viscerally that godhood isn't ascension, but transformation into something alien and terrible. Shadow of the Erdtree also introduces fascinating elements that it deliberately doesn't fully explain, leaving mysteries for the community to unravel and debate. What exactly is the Abyssal Serpent? Why does it reside in Messmer? What connection, if any, does it have to other serpentine entities in the game, like the god-devouring serpent at Volcano Manor? These questions remain open, allowing for interpretation and speculation. Similarly, the exact nature of Marika and Radagon's fusion remains ambiguous. We know they're the same being perceived differently, but how did this happen? Was it always the case, or did they merge at some point? Does it relate to Marika's origins as a shaman, her ability to meld harmoniously with others? The game hints at answers but never provides definitive confirmation, maintaining the mystery that has driven so much community discussion since Elden Ring's release. And what about the future? Shadow of the Erdtree ends with Miquella defeated, his age of compassion prevented. But the world is still broken. The Golden Order still stands, damaged but not destroyed. The Erdtree still glows on the horizon, and presumably you return to the lands between to complete whatever ending you've chosen for your playthrough. But now you carry knowledge that changes everything, an understanding of the foundations upon which this world was built, and the cracks that run through every level of its structure. In this sense, Shadow of the Erdtree functions similarly to Bloodborne's DLC, The Old Hunters, which revealed the origins of the hunt and the healing church in ways that recontextualized the entire base game. You can play Elden Ring without experiencing Shadow of the Erdtree and still have a complete experience. But once you've walked through the land of Shadow, once you've learned these truths, you can never see the lands between the same way again. The expansion also serves as a meditation on the cost of ambition and the value of acceptance. Miquella refused to accept himself as he was, his curse of eternal youth and all the limitations it imposed. He believed he could transform into something better, something capable of saving the world, if he was just willing to pay the price. And he was willing. He paid every price asked of him, and some that weren't, discarding piece after piece of himself until nothing recognizable remained. Saint Trina represents the opposite approach. She accepted what she was, found peace in her role as the saint of slumber, offered that peace to others without demanding they become something different in return. When Miquella abandoned her, she didn't try to force her way back into his consciousness, didn't pursue him or demand recognition. She simply remained, waited, and when the time came, she delivered her message. Let him die, because what he's becoming is worse than death could ever be. This dichotomy extends to many of the expansion's characters and themes. Messmer clings to duty even after duty has lost all meaning, unable to accept that he's been abandoned. The Hornsent survivors seek revenge for the genocide against them, unable to accept that revenge will only perpetuate the cycle. Miquella's followers, even after the charm breaks, mostly choose to continue following him, unable to accept that their entire pilgrimage was based on manipulation rather than genuine belief. And you, the Tarnished, are forced to choose between acceptance and ambition, between letting things play out and intervening to prevent outcomes that seem inevitable. Do you honor Saint Trina's request and kill Miquella before he can complete his transformation? Do you side with Leda and help bring about the Age of Compassion, believing that even if the means are questionable, the end result might be worth it? Do you follow your own path entirely, ignoring all the factions and their competing claims? The game doesn't judge you for your choice. It presents the situation, provides the information, and steps back to let you engage with the ethical complexity of it all. This respect for player agency, this refusal to provide easy moral clarity, is part of what makes From Software's storytelling so compelling. They trust their audience to think, to question, to reach their own conclusions, rather than having everything explained and moralized. As we reach the end of this exploration, I want to leave you with one final observation that brings everything full circle. A revelation that might make you want to start the entire game over just to see it with new eyes. Remember the beginning of our story? How we started with Marika as a victim of genocide, traumatized into godhood, enacting her own revenge genocide in response. And remember how we followed Miquella's journey as he abandoned piece after piece of himself to to pursue divinity, stripping away his humanity in the name of creating a gentler world. Here's what Shadow of the Erdtree is ultimately revealing through these parallel stories. Miquella was becoming his mother. Not metaphorically, literally. Step by step, choice by choice, he was following the exact same path Marika walked centuries earlier. Marika experienced trauma. So did Miquella. His curse, his sister's curse, the inability to cure her. Marika decided that Godhood would give her the power to prevent future suffering. So did Miquella. Marika abandoned her humanity in the process, sealing away empathy, hiding the truth, using people as tools. So did Miquella, abandoning his love, his doubt, his flesh, charming people to follow him without consent. Marika created an order built on good intentions. No true death, everyone returns to the Erdtree, eternal life of a sort, that turned oppressive in practice. Miquella was creating an age of compassion that would have worked exactly the same way, enforcing kindness through mind control. Marika paid for this by being imprisoned within the Erdtree, crucified on a rune arc, punished by the very system she served. Saint Trina tells you explicitly that Godhood would be Miquella's prison too. The cycle was repeating. The trauma was perpetuating itself across generations. The son was becoming the mother, following the same broken pattern, unable to see that the solution he was pursuing was just another version of the problem. And here's the twist that makes this genuinely brilliant. You, the Tarnished, are the only one who can see this clearly, precisely, because you're the one person in this entire universe who doesn't belong here. Think about what you are. You're dead. You died outside the lands between, in a foreign land, without grace. You're tarnished, exiled, stripped of blessing, cast out by Marika herself generations ago. You exist outside the system. You're not bound by the Golden Order's rules because you were explicitly excluded from them. You're not fooled by Miquella's charm because you've built resistance through sheer bloody-minded stubbornness and hundreds of deaths. You're not swayed by the Two Fingers prophecies because you've already rejected every authority figure who tried to tell you what to do. You've died to every major boss in this game at least once. You've failed, learned, adapted, and overcome through sheer refusal to stay down. That's not just a gameplay mechanic. That's your entire narrative role. You're the one who breaks patterns by being too stubborn to follow them. When you kill Miquella at the Gate of Divinity, and yes, despite his talk of compassion, despite his genuine desire to help, you do kill him. You're not just stopping a would-be god from ascending. You're breaking a cycle that has repeated for generations. You're preventing history from rewriting itself. You're showing that the answer to trauma isn't more trauma dressed in gentle language, that the solution to oppressive order isn't a kinder oppression, that you can't fix a broken system by becoming powerful enough to control it, because the very act of gaining that power transforms you into someone who will wield it the same way everyone before you did. This is why Shadow of the Erdtree is more than just an expansion. This is From Software's thesis statement about power, trauma, revenge, and the eternal human tendency to believe that this time, with us in charge, things will be different. Marika thought she was different. Miquella thought he was different. They were both wrong. But maybe you can be different. Not because you're stronger or wiser or more virtuous, but because you're the only one who was never invited to the table in the first place. The outsider, the Equal, the Tarnished who died in a foreign land and came back for reasons even you don't fully understand. Here's ours the final revelation, the one that recontextualizes your entire journey. What if the reason you were brought back wasn't to fix the Elden Ring, or serve the greater will, or help Miquella create his age of compassion? What if the entire point was for someone, anyone, to finally break the cycle by refusing to participate in it. Maybe by choosing not to become Elden Lord in service of the greater will's absent voice, by refusing to help Miquella impose his gentle tyranny. By seeing clearly what everyone else can't see, you accomplish something no god or demigod could. You show that it's possible to opt out, to say no, to reject the entire premise of cosmic order imposed through power. Or maybe you can't. Maybe the universe is too broken, the patterns too deeply ingrained, the systems too powerful to overcome. Maybe the best you can do is understand, choose consciously, and refuse to participate in perpetuating what you know is wrong. Maybe that's enough. Maybe being the one who sees clearly is the only victory available in a world this fundamentally broken. Either way, you'll never see the lands between the same way again. That golden light shining from the Erdtree. You know now what it's hiding. A mass grave, a genocide covered up, a survivor's revenge that became just as monstrous as the crime that inspired it. Those cosmic powers claiming divine authority? You know they're improvising, have been for centuries, maybe forever. Those kindly figures promising better worlds? You know exactly what they're willing to sacrifice. Everyone else's autonomy, freedom, and right to choose, to make those promises come true. And you know something else, something that might be the most important realization of all. You were the one person in position to stop it. Not because you were chosen by prophecy or blessed by gods or granted special powers, but because you were excluded, rejected, cast out. And that exclusion, that exile, was what finally gave someone the perspective to see the whole game for what it was and choose not to play. Welcome to the shadow beneath the Erdtree. The truth was always here, waiting for someone willing to look. Someone like you, dead, tarnished, and too stubborn to follow anyone else's script. Thank you for walking this long, shadow-draped path with me. Thank you for staying through revelations that recontextualize entire games, through stories of trauma and revenge, through the darkest secrets from software has ever buried in their worlds. If this journey has changed how you see Elden Ring, if you're thinking about booting up the game right now just to look at the Erdtree with these truths in mind, or if you're lying there in the dark, turning over the implications of Miquella's charm or Marika's genocide, then this script has done what it set out to do. If you found value in this deep dive, if these hours spent unraveling mysteries and examining themes have enriched your understanding of the lands between and the shadows beneath them, please consider subscribing to Sleepable Gaming Lore. There are so many more worlds to explore, so many more secrets buried in the spaces between gameplay and story, so many more nights to spend wandering through digital landscapes in search of understanding. And please, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me which revelation hit you hardest. Tell me if you think Radahn consented. Tell me whether you believe Miquella could have created a genuinely better world if his plan had succeeded, or whether Saint Trina was right that Godhood would have been his prison. The joy of From Software's storytelling is that it invites discussion, rewards multiple perspectives, demands that we engage with it rather than passively consuming it. This is my interpretation, my understanding of Shadow of the Erdtree, but yours might be completely different. And that's what makes this community worth being part of. One final thought before I let you drift off. In a world as broken as the one we've explored tonight, in a universe where trauma perpetuates itself across generations and gods trap themselves in cages of their own making, maybe the real victory isn't fixing everything. Maybe it's simply seeing clearly, understanding what's broken, why it broke, and choosing not to perpetuate the same patterns even when power whispers that this time will be different. You've seen beneath the veil now. You know what the golden light was hiding, and you can never unsee it. Rest well, fellow tarnished. May your dreams be gentler than the age of compassion Miquella tried to force upon the world. And may you wake with the knowledge that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's vision of paradise. This has been Sleepable Gaming Lore. The shadows hold more truth than any light ever could. Sleep well.